Quite a week. Thanks for joining us. Glad you can make it. Um, we um, we are now into the second 100 days of Joe Biden's administration. I should say the first 100 days of a presidency. Um, and I don't know if I actually knew this or I have just simply forgotten about it. I was reminded by Heather Parton, who is a frequent guest on this show, that the first 100 days was became a thing because of FDR's first 100 days and how much was accomplished during that. And I think it's been a while since more was accomplished in the context of first 100 days. That said, the tasks at hand are quite large, and um, certainly in terms of COVID, we have 34 states where the numbers are going down. Vaccination rates have been slowed significantly. People are speculating as to the reasons why. We could have hit sort of the natural limits of the sort of pent up demand for the vaccine. And then you have certain communities that are difficult to reach. You have low income folks who don't necessarily have the same um, relationships with with hospitals and with medical providers. You have maybe, some of these mass vaccination places require a lot of travel and people can't take off work to go there. And then you have people who are reluctant to take it or just don't take it seriously. There is some conjecture that the pause in the Johnson and Johnson vaccine scared people. It's unclear. We need more data with that, but that's where we're at this point. Um, but we will see what comes in the next 100 days of the Joe Biden administration. And I think, for all intents and purposes, if this could be the last 100 days where we could see the potential for anything happen. Maybe 150 days, 120 days. But if it doesn't happen now, it's hard to imagine it's going to happen anytime later, as the closer we get to midterm elections.
Well, I think you feel the air kind of leaking out of the balloon a little bit, and then as David Dayen pointed out yesterday, you hear the shadows of austerity talk from Joe Biden creeping back in, which he'd kind of shunned beforehand, which was a welcome change. But there is some sort of a shift happening now. And it's up to all of us, I guess, to keep the pressure on, but there's only so much you can do to kind of such an old school president, I guess.
Well, and it's also just a function of like how, what tact will they take with Joe Manchin? And I would say it's not austerity that we're hearing from Biden as much as it is deficit hawkery. And
yes, that's
and
what I meant to say. Yes.
there's no one out there pushing any type of cuts. It's really just a question of like this concept of pay for, which is used more often than not as a way of preventing expenditures on.
On Casual Friday, I use the wrong words for things and misspeak. So that's
Oh,
the
that's all
other
right.
feature of it,
Every
right?
day I mispronounce things, so that's just part of it. Every day that ends with a Y. But one of the things that we spoke about with Dayan yesterday was the idea that there are two separate components to this. There is the taxation component and there is the spending component. Now, let's put aside for a moment the reconciliation requirements that these things, or the Byrd rule that there's certain spending proposals that need to be revenue neutral for a moment. Dayan is, from his conversations in his reporting, sees these two components as severable. Now, I don't personally think that we need to worry about paying for these things at all or the deficit. However, the desire to raise these taxes has to do with wealth inequality. And so there is actually a proactive reason to raise these taxes. However, he seems to think that there is more opportunity for the Democrats to coalesce on the spending side of the equation. So it's interesting when you see conservatives, and I don't want to do the old, the hackneyed sort of version of like, oh, it's just a bunch of white guys sitting around a table with cigars and and scotch or something as a way of explaining what, Republicans are about. I know that's old timey and just a meme, and it's a silly idea. But here is a bunch of Republican conservatives sitting around a table, smoking cigars, drinking scotch, complaining about taxes.
I was screaming at the television when he's talking about taxes because what he is saying is so obviously asinine. When he says that rich people don't pay their fair share in this country, that is just an abject, disgusting lie. It is a lie. The top 10% of income earners in this country pay all net taxes, not some of the net taxes, all of the net taxes, because net taxes are defined as what you pay into the government minus what you get back from the government. So if you get back from the government more than you paid in, this means that you were not a person who paid net taxes into the government. Only the people at the top of the spectrum are paying net taxes in this country. All of the net taxes in this country. Yeah. When he says they're not paying their fair share, the only thing he means by they're not paying their fair share is it should be nearly all of your income goes to the federal government. And when he says things like, I'm not going to tax anybody who's making under $400,000 a year, he is lying to you through his teeth. When he says I'm going to tax corporations, corporations are not human beings for purposes of taxes. The money that would have been passed on to you via income is being taxed up here. That money is now being withdrawn from the system and taken away from you. Corporations are going to have to raise prices in order to deal with the taxation effects. When he says that I'm going to tax all of these rich people on their capital gains taxes, what do you think those rich people are going to do rather than put their money in the stock market where they get taxed on capital gains? They're not going to put their money in the stock market. So what happens to your 401k if you're a union member or a teacher's union member? What do you think happens to all the other 50% of the population who are invested in the stock market right now? And what happens to the businesses that hire you when Joe Biden decides that your boss needs to be taxed out of existence in order so that he can determine where the dollars go? This jackass who's never created a single job in his entire life.
The people who don't pay their fair share in this country are the poor. We need to raise taxes on the poor. I'm not joking. I'm not joking. The poor in this country pay zero. The lower middle class in this country pay net zero. So we have a group of people who pay no taxes, a group of people who pay no net taxes, a group of people who pay all the net taxes. And his argument is that it's category 3 who don't pay their fair share. Fair share means your percentage of taxes. We've determined that there are some people who shouldn't pay any percent of taxes. The only fair taxing system is one in which everyone pays. But
I love the idea that they have decided they're speaking from authority as to like, here's the definition of fair. Here's the definition of what fairness is in taxes. This net taxes sort of metric that they have decided. Let's get to the part about the taxing of the poor in a moment, because they all laughed at this guy when he said that. Even these jokers thought that was a joke.
Right.
But let's just start with the idea of net taxes. First of all, no one assesses whether you're paying enough taxes based on net taxes as to what you get back from the government. Because if that was the case, then we would spend a lot of time chastising all the red states that get more back from the federal government than they do from New York and California. If we were talking about fairness in that respect, New York and California would have more of a say in the way, in the Senate, for instance, as to what the taxation is, because they put more money into the federal government than they get out relative to these red states. So that assessment is absurd. Joe Biden should have said no household that makes more than $400,000. It's really technically $560,000, because you do not see a raise in your taxes unless your household makes you joint file because you're married. If you together are making over $500,000 each year, that's when you start to see a small raise in your taxes that is a fraction, literally a fraction of what it was back in the 50s and the 60s. So the idea that this is absurd is ridiculous. The idea that corporations are not people for the purposes of taxation is just something that Ben Shapiro decided to make up.
Well, I mean, Ben Shapiro, are they people when it comes to donating to politicians? Do they have free speech rights? I'd love for him to contend with that, given his new posture that they're only not people when it comes to taxation, Sam, but they're people with rights when it comes to every other way that corporations want to influence politics and policy.
Forget the hypocrisy. These rules don't grow on trees. They're where what society decides.
Well, look at Bill Gates. Like, Bill Gates is somebody who pays a lot of taxes, but the government certainly covers Bill Gates. Like, he's getting his value for money with regards to how the government, say, protects his IP, for instance.
That's the other
They
point.
couldn't exist without the government.
On one hand, they will celebrate American exceptionalism. But when it comes to assessing how much America has provided for them, the ability to make these obscene amounts of money, never mind our government structures that benefit the rich, mortgage interest deduction, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of these things. The idea that you're not getting from the government anything when you're making hundreds of millions of dollars or even $500,000 annually as a household. The idea that you're not getting something from the government that other people aren't is just absurd. Of course you are.
Yeah.
Of course you are.
And of course he chooses net taxes. Again, this absurd, it's just out of thin air. And the Facts Don't Care About Your Feelings guy doesn't bring up the report that informed a lot of what Biden is doing about how the richest 1% are dodging more than 20% of their taxes. And that is just a plain fact. But of course, I guess it was written about in the Washington Post, so it's the fake news media. And just back to the poor argument there where they all laughed at him. Who is that guy, by the way?
I have no idea who that dude is.
It's Jeremy Boring. He's one of the founders alongside Ben Shapiro.
Okay. If the poor aren't paying enough taxes, how are they like that he wants them to be even more poor? Because if they're tax dodging and they're not paying their fair share, they're still impoverished. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, they all left because they like people being impoverished.
Yeah.
They want people more impoverished.
It's hilarious
as they drink scotch and puff on cigars. What a ridiculous segment. They're so overly concerned with like this old Mad Men-esque performative masculinity and making people know that this is who they are. And Ben Shapiro, he just looks so out of place in that kind of situation, you know?
I watched that thing and I was just like, did none of them look around and go like, geez, guys, we're like a parody of ourselves. Can you believe this? Like, can't we just like,
they think it's cool.
Don't we have at least a woman, you know, anywhere in the office that we can just have sit on set so that we can actually just make it look like we're not a parody of ourselves?
But that would be virtue signaling and caving to the radical left.
There you go. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking to Alex Perrine.